Horrific ritual killings, a hit list of famous celebrities, and a plan to destroy America itself. Come with me as I investigate what really drove Charles Manson. How a bunch of innocent young hippies were turned into sadistic murderers, and how a president of the United States narrowly escaped death at their hands. Incredibly, I'll be showing that the trail of guilt could involve the government of the United States. July 31st, 1969, a 34-year-old music teacher named Gary Allen Hinman is found hacked to death at his home in Topanga Canyon, Los Angeles. It looks like he's been tortured for days before dying. On the wall, in Hinman's own blood, is written "Political Piggies" and a crudely drawn paw print. August the 9th, a middle-aged grocer named Leno LaBianca and his wife Rosemary are brutally slain. Rosemary suffers over 30 stab wounds. Leno is found posed with a pitchfork sticking out of his stomach and a knife from his throat. Carved into his chest is the word "war." On the walls, in their blood, is daubed "Rise" and "Death to Pigs." Between those slayings on the night of August the 8th, comes an event so obscene that it rocked America to its core. Coffee heiress Abigail Folger, screenwriter Wojtek Frykowski, celebrity hairdresser Jay Sebring, and Sharon Tate, actress wife of filmmaker Roman Polanski, are found butchered in a luxury home in Beverly Hills. The heavily pregnant Tate has been stabbed repeatedly and hung. On her stomach is carved a cross. Outside lays a fifth body, 18-year-old Stephen Parent, a chance visitor to the property. On the front door, in Sharon Tate's blood, is the word "pig." The anger and revulsion these killings spark is intense, and that seems to be the point. The slogans daubed in blood, the paw print, it all points to them being the work of the Black Panther Party, a radical black power group. Just weeks earlier, J. Edgar Hoover, all-powerful director of the FBI, had called them the greatest threat to the internal security of the country. Could the murders be the start of the race war that he and others have been fearing? But things aren't as they seem. The Black Panthers condemn the killings, emphasising their commitment to peaceful and legal struggle. No war breaks out on the streets of LA. Then, on August the 16th, police raid a rundown former movie set called the Spahn Ranch, now home to one of the many hippie groups that dot the region. The raid was nothing to do with the killings. The group are suspected of auto theft, but the atmosphere at the ranch seems strange, and the police discover the group has links with Gary Hinman, the first victim. They're released, but rearrested that October and charged with Hinman's murder. In custody, one of the girls, 21-year-old Susan Atkins, a girl from a middle-class family who, a few years earlier, had still been singing in her local church choir, tells cellmates how much she enjoyed stabbing Sharon Tate and tasting her blood, how she'd laughed at Tate's desperate pleas to spare her baby, how she'd written "pig" on the door using Tate's blood, that she also helped in the torture of Gary Hinman and had been stalking another victim on the night of the LaBianca murders. That she'd done it all with her family, the ragtail bunch of runaways, dropouts and lost souls who'd lived at the Spahn Ranch, led by a man who she believed to be Jesus Christ. His real name was Charles Millers Manson. The son of an alcoholic 15-year-old prostitute, Manson claimed he committed his first crime at age 9 by setting fire to his school. At 13, he was in a home for male delinquents. By the time he arrived in San Francisco at the age of 32, he'd spent over half his life in prison for, among other things, armed robbery, auto theft, rape, forgery, drugs offences, and transporting a woman across state lines for the purposes of prostitution. But now it was the summer of love, and something strange had happened. Suddenly, Manson was a guru, preaching his own half-baked philosophy that mixed Scientology, Satanism, and sex with Christianity and a lot of drugs, especially LSD. According to Charlie, when you take LSD enough times, you reach a state of nothing, of no thought. Acid also helped him to attract a group of followers and begin to mould them in his own image with no thought. Followers who became known as the Family, a shifting congregation of up to 100 people, mostly young girls. Their names would become bywords for evil. Mary Marioche Brunner, a university graduate and librarian, Manson's first follower and mother of his son. Lynette Squeaky Fromm, just 18 years old. Ruth Ann Moorhouse, daughter of a Protestant minister and only 14. Most notorious of all, the three girls who came to personify the case: Patricia Katie Krenwinkel, who'd planned to become a nun, but whose destiny was to hack, stab and kick to death Abigail Folger and the LaBiancas; Leslie Lulu Van Houten, aged 19, who was to stab Rosemary LaBianca at least 14 times; and Sexy Sadie, the family's name for Susan Atkins, the choir girl who drank Sharon Tate's blood. Because of the girls, Manson also had male followers who would orchestrate the killings. Musicians Bobby Beausoleil and Steve Scramblehead Grogan, Bruce Davis, described by many as Manson's right-hand man, and former star athlete and honour student Charles Tex Watson, who told victims Wojtek Frykowski, "I am the devil and I'm here to do the devil's business," before stabbing him at least 51 times. These were the key characters who'd feature in the trial that was to follow. Though the savagery and random nature of the killings had seemed unexplainable, the prosecution provided a motive. By targeting rich white people and blaming it on a black group, Manson was trying to start a war that would destroy society and leave him in charge. At the time, that seemed frighteningly possible. America had never been more divided. Anti-war protests and student uprisings were boiling over. Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy had just been assassinated. The continued persecution of black people had led to the founding of militant groups like the Black Panthers, dedicated to defending them. Many in the white counterculture and Hollywood were also calling for revolution. Stars like Jane Fonda, Warren Beatty and Donald Sutherland even formed a White Panther Party to support the cause. But was it really that straightforward? How and why had Charlie the Guru turned into Charlie the racist, homicidal maniac? And why had so many ordinary kids followed him on the journey? It's said that the devil has all the best music, and both the devil and music played a big part in what happened to Manson and his followers. Such extreme, ritualistic crimes immediately led to suspicions of satanic links, and there was reason to think that. In 1966, Anton Szandor LaVey had founded the Church of Satan in San Francisco, attracting a large following among the hippies and activists of Haight-Ashbury. LaVey himself, though, denounced the killings, and there's no suggestion that his church was involved. He also denied that Manson was ever a member, but allegations persist that Manson did attend some ceremonies, and it can be proven that other family members were involved. The woman in these photographs has been identified beyond doubt as Susan Atkins. In the Church of Satan, as in many other occult religions, blood plays a part in the ceremonies. Could that be why Atkins claimed to have tasted Sharon Tate's blood? With other strange ritualistic elements, such as the knife and the pitchfork left in the body of Leno LaBianca, could the killings have actually been a satanic sacrifice? It would certainly explain Tex Watson's words on the night of the Tate killings, "I am the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." Human sacrifice plays no part in any genuine satanic religion, but could Manson's own perverted teachings have included such practices? There are certainly claims the family were behind many other bizarre and bloody killings that could fit the pattern. 64-year-old Nancy Warren and Clyda Delaney, aged 24, were found beaten and strangled to death near Ukiah, California in October 1968. Just like Sharon Tate, Delaney was 8 months pregnant. Members of the group were said to be in the area at the time. In May 1969, the body of Manson's own uncle, 64-year-old Darwin Morrell Scott, was found with 19 stab wounds, pinned to his kitchen floor with a butcher's knife, echoing the LaBianca killing. Manson's exact whereabouts at the time are unknown, but a man fitting his description was seen in the area at the time. Even after Manson's arrest, the killings kept coming. 15-year-old James Sharp and Doreen Gall, 19, were found slashed to death in a Los Angeles alleyway. Each had been stabbed over 50 times. They belonged to the same branch of Scientology that Manson had lifted many of his ideas from, and Gall had reportedly been the girlfriend of Manson's lieutenant, Bruce Davidson. There are also scary similarities between the Manson family killings and a spate of strange, bloody, and still unresolved murders that took place in San Francisco. A series of letters claimed the killings were the work of a serial killer called the Zodiac. But as I explain in this video, there's no proof those letters are genuine and no evidence of who did commit the killings. Given Manson's links to the city, is it possible that some of the Zodiac murders were the work of him or his disciples? Many members of the family itself also died in strange circumstances. Bruce Davis, Scramblehead, and Manson himself were all convicted of the death of Shorty Shear, a Spahn Ranch employee whose mutilated remains weren't found until 1977. But the killings of many others remain unsolved. In 2019, the LA Times reported that LAPD suspected the family of at least 12 unsolved murders. Manson himself claimed there were at least 35 victims. Could these all have been sacrifices too? It's possible, but if so, why were only the 3 killings in July and August 1969 dressed up to look like the work of the Black Panthers? As well as the devil, music also forms a strong lead through this case. Manson learned to play guitar in prison and was a songwriter. The rumour he auditioned for a part in the Monkees TV series is false, but the story that the Beach Boys released one of his songs is completely true and could be a vital element of the mystery. In April 1968, Beach Boys members Dennis Wilson befriended 2 hitchhikers, taking them to his home and feeding them before heading for a recording session. Unknown to him, the girls were members of the family, one of them being Katie Kerwinkle. When he got back, Wilson found Manson waiting for him in the drive. Over the next few months, the family took over Wilson's house, stealing and trashing most of his things. Dennis introduced Charlie to his brother, the legendary Brian Wilson, and they recorded a whole stream of Manson's songs in Brian's home studio. Dennis also introduced Manson to many of his music and showbiz friends, including record producer Terry Melcher, who agreed to help Charlie get a recording contract. Part of the reward for Melcher was the underage Ruth Ann Morehouse, who'd been given to him by Manson. At one point, they were both living with Melcher and his girlfriend, the actress Candice Bergen, in their rented house at 150 Cielo Drive, an address that would soon become notorious. At first, Dennis and Brian Wilson were in awe of Manson and also enjoyed the girls and drugs that he provided, but the relationship soured. Other members of the Beach Boys claimed Dennis became scared of Manson's darkening mood and that he'd witnessed Manson killing people. Melcher too cut off contact and moved house to escape Charlie. As we'll see, this could explain everything that followed. According to prosecutors at the family's trial, the killings could be explained by a slogan daubed on the LaBianca's refrigerator, "Helter Skelter." Unlike the other phrases left during the killings, that seemed to have nothing to do with the Black Panthers, but everything to do with Charles Manson. And today it sounds batshit crazy. The few members of the family who testified against Manson claimed he'd been preaching for months before the killing that a race war was coming. It would be sparked by the reaction to the album of his songs that he was working on with Dennis and Brian Wilson and Terry Melcher. The incredible new truths unveiled by Charlie's wisdom would change the world. The old order would crumble, and as it did, blacks would carry out atrocities, killing rich whites in horrifying ways, provoking whites to fight back. Once this began, Manson, the family, along with any other hippies who made it in time, would head for a magical cavern under Death Valley until the war was over, the same bottomless pit that's mentioned in the Bible's book of Revelations. After all the other whites were dead, Charlie would emerge to rule over the surviving blacks, who, in his opinion, weren't intelligent enough to govern themselves. The codename Helter Skelter itself came from a Beatles song. Manson convinced his followers that the White Album was a message of support from the Fab Four themselves. Hey man, there was even like a song named after Susan Atkins, Sexy Sadie. Far out. Dosed up on acid, isolated from the rest of the world and controlled entirely by Charlie, the family had become a cult, believing every word that came from the guru's lips to be the word of the Lord. If Charlie said a race war was coming, then it was, and if Charlie said kill, then they would. But things weren't working out. Helter Skelter wouldn't happen unless Charlie's music was recorded and released to start the revolution, and now the Beach Boys and Terry Melcher wanted nothing to do with him. According to the prosecutors, that's when Charlie decided he would have to start Helter Skelter himself and ordered the family to start killing in the most barbaric way they could. The killers themselves may have believed all that, but did Charlie? The first Helter Skelter killing of the musician Gary Hinman was more to do with drugs and money than race war. And the house where Sharon Tate was murdered was the same place Charlie had lived with Terry Melcher and Candy Spurgeon. Were they the real targets? There are conflicting claims whether Manson knew that Melcher had moved or not. Was Charlie just taking revenge on his enemies and covering his tracks by pretending he wanted to start a race war? Perhaps, but that's still not the full story at all. And this is where things get even stranger.
Generating.
Since the late 1950s, the FBI's Operation COINTELPRO had been spying on, infiltrating, and actively working to destabilize enemies of the state, which basically meant anyone who wasn't a rich white man. And in the late 60s, it went into overdrive. J. Edgar Hoover, seen here with President Lyndon B. Johnson, was especially frightened of the rise of black rights groups. So the FBI began a campaign to discredit them, churning out fake propaganda, discrediting and even killing key figures such as Black Panther leader Fred Hampton. At the same time, the largely white anti-war and counterculture groups were also targeted. The riots at the Chicago Democratic Convention in 1968 seemed to show that those opposed to the Vietnam War were just as violent as those behind it. But it was later found that a large number of Chicago Police Department, FBI agents and informants were helping to orchestrate the violence, to discredit the anti-war groups. From 1967, the CIA joined the party with Operation Chaos, also sanctioned by Johnson. It was aimed at disrupting the same sort of left-wing civil rights and counter-culture groups with even more questionable methods, as we'll see. So is it possible Manson and the family were being used and manipulated in the same way as the anti-war protesters? That it was the CIA and FBI who planted the idea of Helter Skelter, hoping to discredit enemies like the Black Panthers and the family itself? Perhaps even using Charlie's disciples to eliminate a few more enemies, hippies and left-wing liberals like the Wilsons, Terry Melcher, even the Beatles. A supposed hit list was said to have been found of targets, including names like Frank Sinatra, Diana Ross, as well as John Lennon and Yoko Ono, all of who were also under surveillance by FBI operatives as part of COINTELPRO. Manson sent Dennis Wilson a bullet in the post, a stark message that he was a target too. On the night of the La Bianca killings, Manson drove sexy Sadie Atkins and others to the home of actor Saladin Nadir, but couldn't find the right apartment, preventing another Black Panther outrage that had, perhaps, been ordered by the government. And incredibly, yet another secret CIA program could be the final link in the chain that explains the entire crazy story of Charlie Manson and his family. Throughout the 50s and 60s, the agency was actively working on ways to brainwash, torture, and control subjects, developing drugs and techniques to be used during interrogations and to influence enemy behavior. Unbelievably, they were using ordinary Americans as unwitting guinea pigs for these tests, with trials at clinics across the country. The project was codenamed MKUltra, and one of the most promising things it tested was LSD, the drug at the very heart of Manson's philosophy. Among those conducting trials were Dr. Lewis West. In 1967, he was working at Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, a centre doling out medical help, advice and support for San Francisco's hippie population. Among the people who used the clinic, Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, and many other core members of the family. It would explain the insane loyalty many of the family showed him even after his arrest and imprisonment. During the trial, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten would laugh, joke, and sing Manson-composed songs to disrupt proceedings. Mother Mary, Ruth Ann Morehouse, Squeaky Fromm, and others camped outside the courthouse to show their support. When Charlie carved a cross into his head, so did the family. Those few who testified against Charlie were threatened, hunted down, and often killed. Was this just random family members seeking revenge? Were they still working under Charlie's orders? Or did the CIA and FBI carry on using those members who were free to discredit, threaten, and eliminate enemies? One final extraordinary event might be proof that they were. By the mid-1970s, the mood in America had changed. Black rights and opposition to the government were no longer seen as criminal activity. Nixon had resigned, and the church committee set up by President Gerald R. Ford was intent on revealing the dark secrets of intelligence operations like Chaos and COINTELPRO. On September 5, 1975, President Ford arrived to speak at the California state capitol. As he entered, Squeaky Fromm emerged from the crowd, pointing a pistol at him, and, from a distance of no more than an arm's length away, pulled the trigger. Luckily for Ford, she hadn't loaded the gun properly, and it didn't fire. Could this have been the CIA and FBI's final gamble to stop their dirty secrets coming out? To actually assassinate the president using Squeaky Fromm, a human weapon created years earlier by Charles Manson? Most of the files relating to Chaos and MKUltra were destroyed before the church committee could examine them, so we'll probably never know. Manson died in prison in 2017, never having admitted guilt or remorse or regret. The full truth behind the killings, whether it was the government, the drugs, the devil, or just his own deranged obsessions, probably died with him. Eventually, most of the family did denounce their messiah, perhaps mainly to boost their chances of getting out of prison. Scramblehead Grogan was released on parole in 1985. He was considered so damaged by drugs that he couldn't be held fully responsible for the killings he took part in. Leslie Van Houten was paroled in 2023. Though she had a smaller part in the killings than the others, many say she should have died behind bars. Susan Atkins did just that in 2009, aged 61. Bobby Beausoleil, Tex Watson and Patricia Kerwinkle are likely to follow her. Still imprisoned with dozens of failed attempts to get parole, they're unlikely ever to be freed. Squeaky Fromm was jailed for Ford's attempted assassination, but stayed completely loyal to Manson, even breaking out of jail to try and visit him, earning herself yet more jail time. Eventually released in 2009, she is still totally unrepentant. Interviewed in 2019, she said, "Was I in love with Charlie? Yeah, oh, I still am. I don't think you fall out of love. Was Manson acting alone? Should the surviving killers be freed? Let me know what you think in the comments. Here's the link to my video on the Zodiac killings again. And for another truly bizarre CIA plot, try this video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.